Prepare yourself for a spine-chilling journey into the world of haunted dolls. In this video, we explore the disturbing true stories behind some of the most terrifying dolls that have haunted their owners and captivated the imagination of many. From eerie movements to inexplicable phenomena, these dolls carry dark secrets that will leave you questioning the very fabric of reality. Join us as we delve into the history of these infamous dolls, recounting eyewitness accounts and uncovering the chilling events that surround them. You won't believe the tales of fear and intrigue that unfold as we reveal the truth behind these seemingly innocent toys. If you love horror stories and the supernatural, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more thrilling content. Watch until the end for a special surprise that you won't want to miss. The old house creaked with the weight of its history, every step echoing the memories of those who had lived and died within its walls. The family, eager for a fresh start, thought little of the house's past as they unpacked their belongings. But it wasn't long before the youngest daughter, Emily, stumbled upon something hidden away in the dusty attic. A doll, perfectly preserved despite the decay surrounding it. The doll's glassy eyes seemed to follow her as she carried it downstairs, cradling it like a newfound treasure. From the first night, Emily's room felt different. The air was colder and heavier, as if something unseen lingered just out of sight. Then the whispers began, soft at first, almost imperceptible, but growing louder as the nights wore on. Emily dismissed them as figments of her imagination, but the whispers persisted, their words unintelligible, yet filled with an unsettling urgency. Shadows danced in the corners of her room, and though she tried to ignore them, she could feel the doll's unblinking gaze on her, even in the darkness. Her parents noticed the change in Emily, how she grew quieter, more withdrawn, always clutching the doll as if it were her only friend. They assumed it was just the stress of the move, but the tension in the house was palpable, an invisible force pressing down on all of them. The once warm and welcoming home had taken on a sinister edge, and they could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. The housekeeper, Mrs. Hargrove, had lived in the town her entire life and knew the stories that clung to the old house like a shroud. When she saw the doll in Emily's arms, her face paled, and she crossed herself. "Where did you find that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Emily pointed to the attic, and Mrs. Hargrove's hands shook as she explained that the doll had once belonged to a girl named Lily who had lived in the house long ago. Lily had died under mysterious circumstances, and it was said that her spirit never left the doll behind. The family brushed off Mrs. Hargrove's warning as mere superstition, but the events that followed were anything but ordinary. The doll, once stationary, began to move on its own. It would appear in different rooms, sometimes even in Emily's bed while she slept. The doll's expression seemed to change, its smile more sinister, its eyes darker. The whispers grew louder, filling the house with an overwhelming sense of dread. Emily's dreams turned into nightmares where the doll came to life, chasing her through endless corridors, its laughter echoing in her ears. One night, as the family sat together in the living room, the doll moved in front of them all. Its head turned slowly to face them, and a low, guttural laugh filled the room. The temperature dropped suddenly, and the lights flickered as if something was trying to break through the veil of the living world. The family was paralyzed with fear, unable to comprehend the terror unfolding before their eyes. Emily's mother, Sarah, couldn't sleep that night. She tossed and turned, her mind replaying the moment the doll moved on its own. She tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it had been a trick of the light or an overactive imagination. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. She decided to check on Emily, hoping to find her peacefully asleep. But as she approached her daughter's room, she heard a soft humming sound, a lullaby she didn't recognize. Pushing the door open, Sarah was met with a chilling sight. Emily was sitting up in bed, her eyes wide open, but they were vacant as if she were in a trance. The doll was in her lap, its tiny hands resting on Emily's, and the humming seemed to come from the doll itself. Sarah called out to her daughter, but Emily didn't respond. Instead, she began to speak in a voice that wasn't her own, a voice that was older, more menacing. "The doll is mine," Emily said, her voice a low, threatening growl. "She belongs to me, and I belong to her." The words sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. She rushed to her daughter, trying to pull the doll away, but Emily clung to it with a strength that belied her small frame. The room grew colder, and the shadows on the walls seemed to stretch and twist, forming grotesque shapes. Desperate, Sarah called for her husband, and together they managed to pry the doll from Emily's grip. The moment the doll left her hands, Emily collapsed unconscious. They laid her back in bed, but the sense of dread remained, thick in the air like smoke. The doll was placed back in the attic, locked away where it could do no more harm, or so they thought. The days following Emily's encounter with the doll were marked by a growing tension that permeated every corner of the house. The once cozy home had transformed into a labyrinth of fear, with each creak of the floorboards and gust of wind through the old windows amplifying the family's unease. Emily, who had once been a lively and imaginative child, became increasingly withdrawn. She spent most of her time staring out the window, her expression blank, her eyes distant. But it wasn't just Emily who was affected. The house itself seemed to be alive with a malevolent force. Objects would move on their own, a chair sliding across the room, books falling off shelves, and doors slamming shut without cause. The family would hear footsteps echoing through the hallways when no one was there, and the cold spots that appeared out of nowhere sent chills down their spines. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, the lights began to flicker. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, causing their breath to mist in the air. The silence was broken by the sound of the grandfather clock in the hallway, which began to chime erratically, its hands spinning wildly. The table shook as if something unseen was trying to lift it from the floor. Then, as quickly as it began, the disturbance stopped, leaving the family in stunned silence. Emily's parents were at a loss. They tried to shield her from the growing strangeness, but it was clear that something dark had taken hold of their home. The doll, though locked away, still exerted its influence, and the family could feel its presence in every shadow, in every unexplained phenomenon. It was as if the house itself had become a prison, trapping them in a nightmare from which there was no escape. Emily's nights were plagued by terrifying dreams that left her screaming in her sleep. In her nightmares, the doll would come to life, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light, its limbs moving with a fluidity that was both mesmerizing and horrifying. The doll would chase her through endless corridors, its laughter echoing in her ears, growing louder with each step. No matter how fast she ran, she could never escape the doll's grasp. The dream would always end the same way, with the doll catching her, its cold porcelain hands wrapping around her throat, squeezing until she could no longer breathe. But the nightmares didn't end when Emily woke up. She would often find herself paralyzed in her bed, unable to move or speak as a dark shadow loomed over her. The shadow had no form, no substance, but its presence was suffocating, pressing down on her with a weight that made it hard to breathe. It would whisper to her in a language she didn't understand, its voice filled with malice and anger. Emily's parents were desperate to help their daughter, but nothing seemed to work. The nightmares persisted, and the shadowy figure continued to torment her. They tried to keep the doll locked away, but it was as if the doll's power extended beyond the physical object, seeping into their very lives. The once bright and cheerful Emily was now a shell of her former self, her eyes hollow, her spirit broken. The family's only solace was that the strange occurrences seemed to be contained within the house. But even that small comfort was shattered when Emily began to show physical signs of her torment. She would wake up with scratches on her arms and legs, bruises that appeared overnight without explanation. The family was running out of options, and the darkness that had taken root in their home showed no signs of letting go. The family's desperation led them to seek help from outside. They contacted a paranormal investigator, a man known for his expertise in dealing with haunted objects and cursed locations. When he arrived at the house, the investigator immediately sensed the dark energy that clung to the walls like a thick fog. He walked through the rooms, his face growing more concerned with each step. In the attic, where the doll had been locked away, the investigator paused. He could feel the oppressive weight of the entity that resided within the doll. "This is not just a haunting," he said, his voice grave. "This is something far worse. The doll is a vessel for a powerful spirit, one that has been feeding off the fear and suffering of this family." The investigator explained that the spirit within the doll was not a human soul, but something much darker, an ancient entity that had been bound to the doll through a ritual long forgotten. Its power had grown over the years, and it was now too strong to be easily banished. He warned the family that attempting to confront the spirit could have dire consequences, but they were willing to do whatever it took to free their daughter from its grasp. That night, the investigator set up his equipment in the house, preparing to cleanse the space and banish the spirit. But as he began the ritual, the house erupted in chaos. The walls shook, windows shattered, and the lights flickered violently. The doll, still locked in the attic, began to move on its own, banging against the walls of the trunk where it was stored. The investigator was thrown across the room by an unseen force, his equipment sparking and shorting out. The family watched in horror as the investigator staggered to his feet, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. "I can't do this alone," he said, his voice trembling. "This spirit is too powerful. You need to leave this place now, before it's too late." Determined to understand the entity they were dealing with, the family delved into the history of the doll and the house it had been found in. The local library held records that went back centuries, and it was here that they uncovered the tragic story of Lily, the girl to whom the doll had once belonged. Lily's family had lived in the house in the early 1900s, a time when the town was still shrouded in superstition and fear. According to the records, Lily had been a bright and cheerful child, much like Emily, until the day she found the doll. The townspeople believed the doll was cursed, a conduit for dark magic that had been used by a local witch to summon spirits. Lily's parents had tried to rid themselves of the doll, but each time they tried to destroy it, the doll would reappear, untouched and undamaged. Lily's fate was sealed when she began to speak in strange tongues and exhibit violent behavior. The family sought the help of a priest, but by then it was too late. Lily's body was found one morning in her bed, her face twisted in terror, her hands clutching the doll so tightly that they had to be pried away. The cause of death was never determined, and the doll was passed down through the generations, each new owner meeting a similar, grisly fate. The family's research confirmed their worst fears. The doll was not just haunted, but cursed, bound to repeat the cycle of death and despair that had claimed Lily and her ancestors. The spirit within the doll was ancient, and its thirst for suffering was unquenchable. The more they learned, the more they realized that their only hope of breaking the curse was to destroy the doll once and for all. But they knew that doing so would come at a great cost, for the spirit would not go quietly. The knowledge of the doll's dark history weighed heavily on the family, but it was Emily who bore the brunt of the curse. The spirit within the doll had grown stronger, feeding off the fear and despair that now permeated the house. Emily's behavior became increasingly erratic. She would go for days without speaking, only to suddenly lash out in fits of rage, her eyes blazing with an unnatural fire. Her parents watched in horror as their daughter's personality was slowly consumed by the entity. She would sit for hours, staring at nothing, her lips moving in silent conversation with the unseen. At night, they would hear her talking in her sleep, her voice deep and menacing, as if the spirit within her was trying to communicate with something beyond the mortal realm. The doll, still locked away in the attic, seemed to exert its influence even from a distance. It was as if the spirit was reaching out to claim Emily's soul, pulling her deeper into the darkness with each passing day. The family tried everything, prayers, rituals, even medication, but nothing could break the hold the doll had on their daughter. The final straw came one night when Emily's mother found her standing in front of the attic door, her hand reaching for the latch. Her eyes were glazed, her expression vacant, and she spoke in a voice that was not her own. "She's calling me," Emily whispered, her voice filled with longing. "I have to go to her." Her mother grabbed her, pulling her away from the door, but Emily fought back with a strength that belied her small frame. "Let me go," she screamed, her voice a guttural roar that sent shivers down her mother's spine. "I belong to her." It took both parents to subdue their daughter, and even then, she continued to struggle, her eyes wild with fear and rage. It was clear that the spirit was trying to take full control, and if they didn't act soon, they would lose Emily forever. Desperate and out of options, the family turned to the church, seeking the help of a priest who was known for his ability to perform exorcisms. Father Michael was a stern and stoic man, but even he was unsettled by the stories the family told him. He agreed to come to the house and see for himself the evil that had taken hold of their lives. When Father Michael arrived, he immediately sensed the dark presence that lingered in the air. The house was filled with a heavy, oppressive energy that made it difficult to breathe. He went straight to the attic, where the doll was kept, and as he approached the trunk, he could feel the malevolence radiating from within. The doll was not just an object, it was a beacon for something far more sinister. Father Michael gathered the family in the living room and explained what needed to be done. The exorcism would be dangerous, and there was no guarantee of success, but it was their only hope of saving Emily. The family agreed, willing to do whatever it took to free their daughter from the spirit's grasp. As Father Michael began the ritual, the house responded with fury. The walls shook, and the lights flickered violently. The doll, still locked in the attic, seemed to scream in rage, its voice echoing through the house. Emily fell to the floor, convulsing as the spirit fought to maintain its hold on her. Father Michael continued to pray, his voice strong and unwavering, but the spirit was relentless. Suddenly, the doll burst out of the trunk, flying across the room as if propelled by an unseen force. It landed at Emily's feet, and she reached for it, her face contorted in pain and fear. "She's mine!" Emily screamed, her voice a blend of her own and the spirit's. Father Michael acted quickly, grabbing the doll and holding it aloft, chanting in Latin as the spirit within it thrashed and writhed. With one final desperate prayer, Father Michael commanded the spirit to leave. The doll trembled violently, and for a moment it seemed as if the very walls of the house would collapse. Then with a deafening crack, the doll fell silent, its power broken. Emily collapsed into her mother's arms, sobbing as the darkness that had consumed her finally released its hold. The atmosphere in the house was thick with tension as Father Michael prepared for the final stage of the exorcism. The family watched in anxious silence, their hearts pounding with fear and anticipation. Emily had been resting fitfully since the initial exorcism attempt, her face pale and drawn, as if the very life had been drained from her. The doll, now lying on the altar Father Michael had set up in the living room, seemed deceptively innocuous, its porcelain face frozen in a faint smile. But everyone in the room knew better. This was no ordinary doll. Father Michael began the ritual with a prayer, his voice steady and commanding. The air grew colder with each word he spoke, and a low, ominous hum seemed to vibrate through the walls. The family huddled together, their eyes fixed on the doll, which began to tremble slightly. As Father Michael sprinkled holy water on the doll, it reacted violently, jerking and twitching as if something inside it was fighting to break free. The room darkened as a shadow spread from the doll, swallowing the light and filling the space with an oppressive, malevolent presence. The walls groaned under the weight of the entity's fury, and the windows rattled as if they were about to shatter. Father Michael didn't falter. He continued his prayers, raising his voice above the rising cacophony of growls and hisses that filled the air. The doll's eyes began to glow, a sickly green light that pulsed with the rhythm of the chants. Suddenly, the doll levitated off the altar, hovering in midair as an inhuman scream erupted from its tiny mouth. The sound was deafening, a mixture of rage and pain that sent shivers down the spines of everyone present. Emily, who had been lying quietly on the couch, began to thrash and scream in sync with the doll, her voice blending with the spirits as they both cried out in agony. Father Michael knew the battle had truly begun. The atmosphere in the house was thick with tension as Father Michael prepared for the final stage of the exorcism. The family watched in anxious silence, their hearts pounding with fear and anticipation. Emily had been resting fitfully since the initial exorcism attempt, her face pale and drawn, as if the very life had been drained from her. The doll, now lying on the altar Father Michael had set up in the living room, seemed deceptively innocuous, its porcelain face frozen in a faint smile. But everyone in the room knew better. This was no ordinary doll. Father Michael began the ritual with a prayer, his voice steady and commanding. The air grew colder with each word he spoke, and a low, ominous hum seemed to vibrate through the walls. The family huddled together, their eyes fixed on the doll, which began to tremble slightly. As Father Michael sprinkled holy water on the doll, it reacted violently, jerking and twitching as if something inside it was fighting to break free. The room darkened as a shadow spread from the doll, swallowing the light and filling the space with an oppressive, malevolent presence. The walls groaned under the weight of the entity's fury, and the windows rattled as if they were about to shatter. Father Michael didn't falter. He continued his prayers, raising his voice above the rising cacophony of growls and hisses that filled the air. The doll's eyes began to glow, a sickly green light that pulsed with the rhythm of the chants. Suddenly, the doll levitated off the altar, hovering in midair as an inhuman scream erupted from its tiny mouth. The sound was deafening, a mixture of rage and pain that sent shivers down the spines of everyone present. Emily, who had been lying quietly on the couch, began to thrash and scream in sync with the doll, her voice blending with the spirits as they both cried out in agony. Father Michael knew the battle had truly begun. The room was plunged into silence as the demon's roar faded into nothingness. The doll dropped to the floor with a dull thud, its porcelain face shattered into 1,000 pieces. Emily lay still on the couch, her breathing shallow but steady. The family rushed to her side, their relief palpable as they saw that the darkness had lifted from her eyes. But Father Michael remained wary, sensing that the battle was not yet over. He bent down to inspect the remains of the doll, his heart sinking as he noticed something strange. Despite the damage, the doll's eyes were still intact, glowing faintly with that same sickly green light. Father Michael knew that the demon had not been fully defeated. Its essence still lingered within the remnants of the doll, waiting for an opportunity to return. He realized that the only way to truly end the curse was to destroy the doll completely, to ensure that no trace of the demon remained. Father Michael gathered the doll's pieces and placed them in a metal box. He instructed the family to follow him outside, where he built a fire in the backyard. The flames crackled and roared as Father Michael placed the box into the fire, reciting prayers to cleanse the evil that had plagued them. The family watched as the box glowed red hot, the flames licking at the edges as the doll's remnants were consumed. But as the fire burned, a chilling wind swept through the yard, and the faint sound of a child's laughter echoed through the night. The flames flared up violently, and for a moment, the green light shone brightly, illuminating the yard in an eerie glow. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the light faded, and the fire died down to embers. Father Michael collapsed to his knees, exhausted but victorious. The doll was no more. Its power was finally extinguished. The family gathered around Emily, tears of relief streaming down their faces. They had survived the ordeal, but the memory of what they had faced would stay with them forever. The demon was gone, but the scars it had left on their souls would never fully heal. In the days that followed the exorcism, the house was eerily quiet, as if the very walls were recovering from the trauma they had witnessed. Emily slowly began to regain her strength, though the shadows under her eyes and the haunted look in her gaze remained as a reminder of what she had endured. The family tried to return to normalcy, but it was clear that their lives had been irrevocably changed. The metal box that had held the doll's remains was buried deep in the backyard, far from where anyone would think to look. Father Michael had warned the family that even the ashes of such a cursed object could retain some of its malevolence, and it was better to keep it hidden and forgotten. But despite their best efforts, a sense of unease lingered in the air, a feeling that the doll's presence was not entirely gone. Emily's parents noticed small things: strange noises in the night, a sudden chill in the air, and objects that seemed to move on their own. They tried to brush it off as nerves, a residual fear from their ordeal, but deep down, they knew something was still wrong. The doll's spirit had been banished, but its influence had left a stain on their home, a stain that would not be easily erased. One evening, as Emily's father was walking through the backyard, he noticed something strange. The ground where they had buried the metal box was disturbed, the earth freshly turned as if something had clawed its way out. His heart raced as he dug into the soil, only to find the box empty, its lid twisted and broken. Panic set in as he realized the doll's spirit had not been destroyed. It had escaped, leaving them vulnerable to its wrath once more. The discovery of the empty box sent the family into a state of heightened paranoia. They had thought the nightmare was over, but now it seemed the doll's spirit was still with them, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Emily's mother began to notice strange occurrences around the house, doors that opened and closed on their own, whispers in the night, the feeling of being watched. Emily herself was not immune to these disturbances. She would often wake up in the middle of the night, feeling a cold presence beside her bed, as if the doll had returned to claim her once more. Her nightmares returned, more vivid and terrifying than before, filled with images of the doll's cracked face and glowing eyes. The family was trapped in a cycle of fear, unable to escape the ghost that haunted their home. The final straw came when Emily's mother found a note scrawled in childish handwriting on the wall of Emily's room. It read, "I'm still here." The words sent chills down her spine, and she knew they had to leave the house before the doll's spirit consumed them all. They packed their belongings and left in the dead of night, leaving behind the home that had once been their sanctuary, but had become a prison of terror. They moved to a new town, far away from the memories of the past, hoping to start fresh. But even in their new home, the fear lingered. They could not shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the doll's spirit had followed them, waiting for the right moment to make its presence known. The family lived in constant fear, never fully at ease, knowing that the evil they had faced was not truly gone. The family's new home was smaller, cozier, and devoid of the dark history that had plagued their previous residence. They tried to settle into their new lives, determined to put the past behind them and move forward. Emily started at a new school, made new friends, and slowly began to rebuild the life she had lost. Her parents did their best to create a sense of normalcy, though the memories of the doll still haunted their dreams. Despite their efforts, there was always an undercurrent of tension in the household. The family remained vigilant, always on the lookout for signs that the doll's spirit had followed them. They avoided talking about the events that had led them to flee their old home, but the unspoken fear hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder that they could never truly escape their past. One day, a package arrived at their doorstep. It was unmarked with no return address, and the sight of it filled the family with dread. Emily's father opened the package with trembling hands, and inside he found a doll, pristine and untouched, its porcelain face eerily familiar. It was identical to the doll they had tried so desperately to destroy, as if nothing had ever happened. The sight of it sent a wave of terror through the family, and they knew that their nightmare was far from over. The doll was placed on a shelf in the living room, where it seemed to watch over the family with its cold, unblinking eyes. No matter what they did, they could not get rid of it. It always found its way back. The family lived in fear, knowing that the doll's spirit was still with them, waiting for the right moment to strike. They had escaped one haunting, only to find themselves in the grip of another, and this time, there would be no escape. The doll, once a simple plaything, had become a harbinger of doom for all who came into contact with it. Its curse spread like a plague, infecting each new owner with the same fear and despair that had consumed Emily's family. The doll changed hands many times over the years, each new owner unaware of the dark history that accompanied it. But the curse was relentless, and one by one each new family fell victim to the doll's malevolence. The stories of the doll became legend in the small town where Emily's family had once lived. People spoke of it in hushed tones, warning others to stay away from the cursed object. Some claimed to have seen the doll in their nightmares, its cracked face and glowing eyes haunting them even in sleep. Others swore they had heard the doll's laughter echoing through the night, a chilling reminder of the evil that lurked within. Despite the warnings, the doll continued to find new victims. Each new owner thought they could handle it, that the stories were just old wives' tales. But the doll's curse was unbreakable, and it consumed each new family with the same fury. The once innocent toy had become a symbol of terror, a reminder that some things are better left forgotten. The legend of the doll grew over time, and soon it became more than just a story. It became a warning. People knew to stay away from the doll, to avoid the house where it had last been seen. But the curse was far from over, and the doll's spirit was still out there, waiting for the next unsuspecting victim to claim as its own. Emily, now grown, had tried to move on from the horrors of her childhood, but the memories of the doll still haunted her. She had left her family's home behind, moved to a new city, and started a new life. But the shadow of the doll's curse followed her wherever she went. She would often wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, with the sound of the doll's laughter ringing in her ears. Despite her best efforts, Emily could not escape the past. She had tried to forget, to push the memories down into the darkest corners of her mind, but they always resurfaced, bringing with them the same fear and despair she had felt as a child. She began to research the doll's history, desperate to find a way to break the curse once and for all. Her search led her to a discovery that chilled her to the bone. The doll's curse was tied to her family's bloodline. The spirit that inhabited the doll had been bound to her ancestors through a dark ritual, and it would not rest until it had claimed the last of their bloodline. Emily realized that the doll's curse was not just a random occurrence, it was a legacy, passed down from generation to generation, and she was the next in line. With this knowledge, Emily knew she had no choice but to confront the doll one last time. She could not allow the curse to claim any more victims, and she could not live the rest of her life in fear. She had to end the curse no matter the cost. Emily returned to the old house where it had all begun, determined to face the doll and the spirit within it. The house had long been abandoned, its windows boarded up, and its walls crumbling with age. But as she stepped inside, she felt the same oppressive energy that had haunted her childhood, the same cold presence that had watched her every move. The doll was waiting for her, sitting on a dusty shelf in the living room, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Emily felt fear wash over her, but she pushed it aside. She had come too far to turn back now. She knew what she had to do. She approached the doll, her hands trembling as she reached for it. The moment her fingers touched its porcelain surface, the room erupted in chaos. The walls shook, and the windows shattered as the spirit within the doll fought to maintain its hold. Emily could feel the darkness closing in around her, suffocating her, but she refused to let go. With a cry of determination, Emily hurled the doll into the fireplace, where a fire roared to life as if by magic. The doll's screams filled the room, a sound so terrible it made her ears bleed. But she stood firm, watching as the flames consumed the cursed object. The spirit within the doll thrashed and writhed, trying to escape, but the fire was relentless, burning away the last remnants of the curse. As the doll was reduced to ashes, the house fell silent. The oppressive energy that had filled the room dissipated, leaving behind a sense of peace that Emily had not felt in years. She collapsed to the floor, tears streaming down her face. But these were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of relief. The curse was finally broken, and the doll's spirit was gone. Emily knew she would never be the same, that the scars of her past would always be with her. But she had faced her demons and won. She had ended the curse that had haunted her family for generations, and in doing so, she had reclaimed her life. The doll was no more. With it, the darkness that had consumed her childhood was finally laid to rest. Are you craving more spine-chilling tales? Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to never miss a new story. Join us for more terrifying journeys into the unknown, where suspense and horror lurk around every corner. And don't forget to share your thoughts and suggestions for our next video in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Stay tuned if you dare.